Assalamualaikum Ruhi.
Walaikum salam.
I'm so excited to have you here.
Same here, I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so the questions that we have received are so relatable and interesting that I can't wait to get the answers from you.
I'm sure I'm super excited to talk about them with you.
So let's get started.
Yes.
So, can you tell us how does Islam view mental health?
So, Islam has a very holistic view of well being in general, where it takes into account mind, body, and soul. So, everything that we do on a daily basis is taken care of very beautifully in Islam, be it the diet we eat on a daily basis or the way we interact with people, what is a good way to talk to people, or just being sensitive about others, or taking care of your soul by just refraining yourself from things that are harmful to you in a long run spiritually. So everything is taken into account, and I think mental health is not individual, it is related to how you live an overall life of like physical health and spiritual health. And another thing Islam very beautifully talks about that a lot of us might not be aware of is it really normalizes the way it views emotions like sadness, anger, even the negative emotions that we experience on a daily basis are very much acceptable to feel from a religious point of view.
If that's the case, Ruhi, why do we see some of us feeling guilty of going through mental health issues as if their faith is not strong enough?
I think it's less of a religious thing and more of a cultural thing, where if somebody is feeling anxiety, we would hear people say things like, oh, you don't trust Allah enough, so you're worried about the future, just have tawakkul. Or if somebody is experiencing depression, you'll hear things like, oh, just be more grateful, people have had it worse, you're just not counting your blessings. But that's not what our religion says about mental health and these emotions. In fact, mental health is very different from just feeling sad and not being grateful or not having trust on Allah. Of course, those are also spiritual concerns, as I mentioned in the last question that you asked me about spiritual health, about taking care of your soul. But that's different than taking care of your mind and your emotions, where mental health can be a serious issue, and even though you are counting all your blessings and having full faith on Allah, it could be a pure biological thing and you may have to take an expert advice for that. And even when you look at our imams and prophets, you'll know that if Islam did not encourage experiencing these emotions in a normal manner, you wouldn't see, for example, fourth Imam grieving after the incident of Karbala, or you wouldn't be looking at Imam Ali making a room for Bibi Fatima just so that she could safely weep and have her own space after Prophet passed away.
Right, exactly. In fact, in the Quran itself, there are so many personalities who have opened up about their mental health issues with Allah. So, can you tell us how can our community be less judgmental about the issue, and how can they actually help those who have this kind of issue?
I think it's a wonderful question, Iram. Majorly, if we just start being good listeners and start showing curiosity into other people's lives as to what they are experiencing and go into the depth of what they are trying to tell you, you will be in a much better position to just provide them the space and share what they are sharing. Because more often than not, it's not about giving the right advice or saying the right words that helps, but just being there and feeling understood is so simple but yet so rare to experience in today's life, that counselors are everywhere just because of that, which unfortunately is not needed. Psychologists are there ideally to provide help for bigger mental health issues, but because unfortunately our society lacks just the empathy, just entering the other person's world and trying to imagine what they are going through without having a say or a word of what they should be doing instead. I think we make such a big difference by just doing that simple thing.
That's so true. I'll read out the next question.
Yeah.
I am an introvert and I want to balance my personality in public. What should I do?
I think there are a lot of ways to open up in public if you are an introvert. But the bigger, more important thing here that I'd firstly want to emphasize on is that being an introvert is not naturally a bad thing, and you can be comfortable in your space and have a choice to not open up always and push yourself to people who are extroverts and wanting to be like them. So as long as you are accepting yourself, you're happy with yourself, and without losing your personality, if you want to just take that leap of growth and grow as a person, then probably you have a number of things that you can do. For example, just writing or imagining a social scenario and practicing it in your head, or practicing it in front of the mirror, talking to people about it, talking to your extrovert friends about how you can do it, taking help basically, and accepting that you want to just grow is not a bad thing. But more importantly, I think introverts have a beautiful quality and a strength that you can use right now, which is that introverts are great listeners and observers. So if you just use that in a social scenario where you use your good observation skills and listening to actually express what you observe and listen, I think you will be an amazing person to listen to.
All my relationships are giving ones. I cannot say no to anything and I don't know how to draw a line. I'm always available for everyone, but I don't get anything in return. So, how can someone deal with this situation?
I'm sure it's a difficult situation when you're constantly, you see yourself giving, giving, giving and not having anything in return. It can be a lot exhausting in the long run. And initially, I would say I'm curious to know why somebody would put themselves in a situation like this. I'm sure it's not always us who do this consciously, but in a long run, if this has been a pattern that all your relationships, because the question mentions all my relationships are giving, it means that there has been a pattern where you've been doing this a lot of the time. And I would wonder why. Is this something that you've been raised to do so? Is this something that's coming from your childhood? I've seen a lot of kids, especially who are the first born children or girl child in India especially, who are made to feel responsible not just for household work or other responsibilities, but the more concerning thing is to be responsible for other people's emotions also at times, which can be a very unhealthy thing on a long run. As an adult, you may feel like you're just a child and how is it connected to what you're feeling right now, but everything is connected. And in fact, your experiences of your childhood are some of the building foundations of what you experience as an adult in a very unknowing manner. So ask yourself if this has been a pattern and you have been giving even before people have been asking for it, just by assuming that you're supposed to be there and that it's your job to always give. So if that's the case, then you may want to just take a step back and observe when people are really asking you for it and then give them. Sometimes I see, especially women, I'm not generalizing this, but even men, of course, but sometimes I do see people jumping in to help without being asked to help. So personally, if I share my experience, then I've been somebody like that at some point also, until I've gained the awareness that if somebody is struggling with something at home and they don't know how to fix it, or they're just trying to figure it out, I won't have the patience to let them do it, and I'll be like, oh, I'll do it. And then they'll be very happy to take the help, and only to realize that after a point I felt exhausted doing it, and I realized nobody actually asked me to do so, and I could have let them explore, make mistakes, and just give them their space. Another very important thing is that while you're always giving, are you comfortable taking in any kind of help? Because if you're not, then it's just a one-way street, and that makes it very exhausting. To give you a very specific step as to what you may want to try is start asking for help. Instead of stopping to give help, start asking for help. So you're continuing, you're maintaining your personality of giving and helping others, while you're also taking in help from other people sometimes and letting them step into your world. I think that will make a huge difference.
So the next question is very similar to the previous one. I feel like if I do little for someone, they will expect more.
I wonder if this is pertaining to a specific person that keeps asking for more, or is it like a general personality thing as we discussed in the last? Since I've already spoken about the personality thing, I'll say what you could do if this is a specific situation where where you do little and people will keep asking for more. In that situation, maybe you want to step in and confront them in a very respectful manner. You don't need to pick up a fight or something, but just communicate and share your observation as to the fact that we need to draw a line or a boundary. Be very respectful in sharing that I have a few priorities right now. I also feel like this could be coming from something that a lot of us in general lack, which is not being able to say no, or lack of assertiveness, as we call in the counseling term. And more often than not, we are considered to be good people when we say yes to everything. But if we just learn to say no and understand that saying no doesn't make you a bad person, but what's more important is for other people to learn to accept a no also respectfully without taking it personally. And how do you do that? You've always been trained that just say yes, otherwise you're a bad child, and that's something that we grow up listening to, that how can you say no to adults, especially if it's somebody elder you're talking about. Then it can be even more challenging. It's by doing small little things like saying no to people you're more comfortable with. Practice saying no to them once in a while, just because you want to learn this as a skill. You can give them a respectful explanation as to the fact that I have a few things that I'm looking at today, and hence I cannot be there. And eventually they will understand. I'll also tell you one thing. Initially, you might experience a little rejection from people because they're not used to you saying no. You've always said a yes, so you're always worried that the other person is going to do this for you. Initially, this will be a little hard, but as you start doing this, the right people will respect your answer and will be there for you.
Right. And being patient is a good point here, that Allah says in the Quran that those are the ones who will be rewarded with highest place in heaven because of their patience.
Wow.
So maybe it's not about always giving, but sometimes we can not expect anything in return and still give to our loved ones.
Absolutely. If it's your personality, then you must remember that you're doing it for your happiness and not for somebody else in itself.
Right.
And reminding yourself can make a huge difference too.
Yeah. The people who live with me are very rude to me, but when I see them communicate with outsiders, they give them so much respect that I wish I was an outsider to my family. That's so sad.
Indeed, it is. It's like the garden that we don't pay attention to because it's so close to us, it's in our own house, whereas the neighbor's garden just looks so much more pretty because we don't see it that often. While it's sad, it's also important to understand that sometimes, just the way I told you in the previous question, is that children are sometimes raised to be responsible for other people's emotions. Here, what I'm trying to say is that we are responsible for how we feel, and if there is an emotion of this kind where you're constantly going through a treatment that you're not happy with, the only way to get out of it is by expressing it, by not just going with it because it's your family and you do not want to hurt them. Sometimes you won't hurt them if they mean well, and if these relationships are really the right ones for you, then they will come around. Even if they get hurt in the beginning, they will understand it eventually. So express it, communicate, talk, and it's always good to open up. Even if you feel the other person might take it the wrong way, it is still your responsibility to talk it out. It's the other person's responsibility to know how to take it well. It's not your responsibility to make them understand that you need to take this well.
Right.
So if they value you, they will feel slightly guilty, or they will be apologetic for that, and also make other relationships outside your family which are positive for you, which are enriching for you, because there will always be this difference in the relationship you have in your family. There's also this sense of comfort sometimes that the family has, where they don't always feel the need to express this extra affection, which I think is not a bad thing. But it's just, after a point, everyone's a little nicer to people outside. But being nice and being rude are two different things. Being rude is not okay. So if there's disrespect, then you must state it very firmly yet respectfully. And another thing is why I spoke to you about relationships outside and making them, is because that way you are creating a space for yourself where you are a separate entity, not just a part of the family. You are an individual human being, and ultimately you are taking charge of your own emotions independently. And another very important thing is practicing self-care. I don't know if you take care of yourself enough, but I think you must. If you do, increase it even more, because it's exhausting to depend on others for how you feel all the time. So make yourself feel good enough, and if your bucket is full, maybe the people won't have as much of an impact in your life if you're always looking for others. I'll give you a very simple example, okay? If you don't know cooking, then you're always going to be dependent on other people to cook for you or go outside or order, etc. So cooking is a life skill, and if you learn cooking, then it's still a very nice thing to go out to a restaurant and eat it once in a while. But then you're not dependent to going out and ordering all the time. You're doing it for luxury sake. It's a bonus. Similarly, in your relationship, you're not dependent for feeling a certain way, but when they make you feel better, it is a bonus. It's not something that you need from them.
Right, absolutely. I'll read out the next question.
Yeah.
Most of the times I don't feel content even when I realize I'm blessed in many ways. How can I help myself?
Right. Firstly, I'm glad that you realize you're blessed and you already know your blessings. I think it's not a matter of just knowing your blessings that will help you feel more grateful, but it's the matter of consistency and discipline which may help. If I want to lose weight, just going to the gym for a day or not eating dessert for a week is not going to make a difference. What's going to make a difference is doing the same thing, even if it's a 10-minute exercise that I'm doing every day. But what's important is not that 10-minute exercise that I've learned. What's important is the everyday, which I'm doing for at least a year, which makes the difference. So it's very simple, that pick up a very small exercise, maybe write down 3 things that you're grateful for every day. It sounds very simple, but as I said, it's not the exercise which is important, it's the everyday that's important. So the everyday is something you need to remember. You don't need to look for something fancy or magical to look into, to change everything, to change your outlook, but it's small little things that make a big difference on a long term. So I'll just give you a very personal example of the fact that I started a gratitude journal some time back, and every day I would just write something very small in my notes. I didn't even buy a book or something, but I just started clicking a small picture and writing down something, and that lasted for a week or so, and then I forgot. That's what happens, right, with most of us, and that happened with me too. But after maybe a year or something, I just happened to, I had no memory that I'd made this, but I was clearing my phone and I happened to get into that, and the moments I had written were so small that I didn't remember them happening at all. And to my surprise, I thought that I had a great memory and I remember all the beautiful life moments that I've experienced, but I just went into that immediately, and it changed my day that day. I had a new outlook to life, that magical feeling we feel sometimes, and so positive. So I think we are naturally wired psychology to remember the negative incidences very easily, but the positives, the small positives especially, is something that we forget. And research says that it's those small moments that improves your mental health much more than the larger moments that we have once in a while, like birthdays or those critical moments.
Absolutely. That's an impressive explanation. So the next question is very interesting. I think there are many people who felt the same way, one of them being me. When I see influencers work so hard, I feel guilty for not doing enough for my family.
This is something that I think not just us as an audience would feel, but the surprising fact is that even influencers themselves feel it once in a while looking at other influencers.
Oh.
So it's a common thing to compare ourselves and feel like we're not doing enough. And the fact that influencers also feel that is evidence enough that they know their lives better than us, and hence they know the reality of their life, which is not just those small little reels or those small little
Yeah.
videos, which are not just filtered on the phone but are also filtered in the information that they share, which is probably out of 24 hours just an hour long information, and that's not giving you the bigger picture of challenges of reality, of the hiccups and the mess ups that they might be doing. So keep into account that, and also keep into account the fact that even if they have the most beautiful life, let's say, which I doubt, but if they do, it is still okay to not compare yourself with them, because everybody has a different history, a different personality, and you just need to cherish your personality and know that your 100% can be different from this other person's 100%. If you have a bucket full of apples, which is 20 apples, then that's your 100%, and maybe you're giving 10 of them to somebody, then you're giving 50% of it. I have only 5, but I'm giving it all to my family.
Yeah.
So it might look like I'm only giving 5 and you're giving 10, but you're just giving 50% of your capacity, and I'm giving 100% of my capacity. And it's very easy to miss out on information like this. I also want to say one more thing, which is that uh, it's okay to get inspired by influencers also once in a while. Maybe they are doing things that you want to learn from and increase your
Absolutely.
capacity, and that doesn't make you an incapable person. You are capable in yourself and yet want to keep improving by looking at other people. But if you feel like it's affecting your mental health, or is really being counterproductive, is not helping you improve but is actually taking away what you already have, then take a social media break. We all need it. We don't need to be so mentally strong that we don't get affected by anything.
Right.
Just take a break, come back to your life, enjoy it, and realize what a beautiful thing you've made around, and then come back to social media.
Yeah. Right. How can I keep my home environment peaceful? Is the next question.
So that's like baking a cake, you have a base, then you have your decoration, icing, etc. And what's most important for a cake is base and not the icing. You can have a cake and no decoration, but you can't have just the icing and no cake. So the most important thing, the base of your family, is two things: respect and communication. And whatever you do, make a rule in the house. Encourage your kids also, if you have at home, to say or express everything with respect, and that will only come when you show it to them and model it to them. Just because they are kids doesn't mean that we do not respect them. And secondly, communication, as I mentioned. So when you're communicating openly, you're talking about things, you're telling each other stuff that's in your heart, like something that you didn't like the other person do. Sometimes we are taught to let go, which is a good quality in a family, to compromise. But when the letting go is coming in a manner of suppression of your emotions, then it's going to come as an outburst, and that can be way more harmful for a family's peace. So communicate on a regular basis. Why I'm saying this is, imagine a cupboard in your house which is not cleaned for years. It's going to have so much dust and so much of things that you may never want to open it also after a point. But if you are cleaning it on a regular basis, the first time you clean it, it's going to take a longer time. So if you've not communicated for a while and you are starting now, you want to start now, it may be little more difficult, but I'd say start it, because eventually it gets easier. So if I just open the cupboard once and I'm like, it's not getting cleaned, I'm closing it again, it's just too much. I'm never going to be able to clean it. But if I recognize that it's only the first time I'm doing it, so it's going to be tough, but eventually maybe I'll just maintain the cleaning every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or every month I'll have a cleaning session. Similarly, if you have weekly family time, quality time, where you are actually sharing some good qualities about others, some good observations about your family members, and then also sharing a constructive criticism or a feedback for them to grow, you can have a very peaceful environment, I believe. And peaceful environment doesn't mean you do not ever argue. You will argue, and arguments will only make your family stronger. When you avoid talking, that's when the peace is actually at risk. Apart from that, the decoration. Now let's talk about the icing and the fun part, right? Which is fun, entertainment. Um, Take some time out to just play games as a family or do fun things, watch something funny together, go out regularly, have outings, or have rituals. Rituals are very, very, very important for a family. It could be weekly rituals or it could be monthly rituals, but have that designated time to do things. Also, one more very important thing for a family's growth, I would say, not just peace, is education time. While we have kids, we do educate them a lot, and we feel like as adults we don't need that. But spend some time to share knowledge with each other, what's going on in the world around, talk about these issues once in a while. Have a family meeting sort of a thing, maybe once a week, maybe for 20 minutes, half an hour. Let each member speak for 5 minutes, or give each member one particular session of family meeting. So probably this week it's my job to bring up a topic and everybody speak about it, and so on. These things may sound like a lot of work to do, but once started, it's just like everyone will pitch in and follow it up with you. You won't have to do it all by yourself.
Right, I can already imagine everything happening and it's beautiful. I have sinned so much that I feel like a hypocrite. What's the point of going back to Allah?
I think this is something that we all feel at some point in our lives, where we get busy or something keeps happening and we lose our touch of being a good worshipper, and we feel like there's no way back. Uh, Imagine yourself stuck in a traffic jam which is so bad that there's no way to get out of it anytime soon. Would you just park your car and be like, okay, now I'm gonna be here all my life? No, right? You're gonna have some time to figure out. You will be frustrated in that moment, but you'll move on. You know that it's going to move on. You know it's going to go on. In that moment, it's important to know that you're just stuck. This is not permanent. You will have your time around. You just need to believe in that time that's going to come. And you need to keep pushing yourself forward instead of parking that car and living there forever, right?
Yeah.
It sounds funny. So imagine that, and in that moment when you're stuck, do the doable, whatever is in your control. Start small. Just take some time to think, what is the one sin that is the easiest for you to refrain from. Then eventually just go on and start fresh. Instead of focusing on your sins, focus on the things that you're doing well already as a good worshipper, and which will make you closer to Allah. Start by seeking for forgiveness from Allah, and also accepting the fact that you're only human being who will make mistakes and fall down even in the future. It's about time you start that track, and you know that you'll again fall down, but you'll again have to keep going until you reach a better stage of tawakkul and closeness to Allah.
This reminds me of a hadith. It says, "Walk towards me and I will run towards you." Allah says that.
That is so beautiful. Allah's mercy is like ocean, and our sins are just like pebbles. The ocean is always going to be big and grand enough to hold all the pebbles that we throw in.
Right. I feel bad because I cannot pray anything apart from wajib prayers and fasts.
That is something again very relatable. We all get busy in our lives sometimes and only get time to do wajib. uh, but yes, this can be a little uh, disappointing and discouraging in that moment that I'm not able to do much. But take some time to recognize that you're already fulfilling all the basics and you've not lost from that. Recognizing that will encourage you to keep going and doing more and more. I know it's not, sometimes we lack the motivation to do something like that, because wajib is something we do over the years and it's just a habit now.
Yeah.
But doing anything extra takes that little motivation. And if you look at successful people and how they're so disciplined and motivated to do so much in life, you know what most of them say, if you look at interviews of successful people, they'll say that it's not that I'm always motivated, but it's just that I'm always consistent even when I'm not motivated. So bring that consistency with small, very realistic goals. We sometimes strive for so much perfection that we want to be this perfect person, praying all the extra prayers, which is sometimes not realistic in this busy life. And Allah looks at your intention and the quality with which you're doing it. So small realistic goals, encouraging yourself, sometimes negotiate with yourself. If you are not, if you're busy and you don't have time to read in that moment, you're very tired, while you're doing a chore, just listen to it in that moment, and when you're free you probably read it. That way you're negotiating with yourself and doing as much as you can that's in your control, and you're also being realistic with your capability of what you can do in that time. Gradually increase the capacity to keep doing more and more, but while you're not able to do that, just do the doable. Just do the doable is the phrase that I like to use. And sometimes why we cannot do the doable is also because shaitan tries to whisper into your head saying that you're not ever going to be perfect, or you're never able to do this, and you've not done it so far, so just leave it. What's the point of even doing a little bit?
Right, absolutely. I keep repeating my prayers, redo wudu, and keep washing things due to excessive doubting. Is this really a mental health issue, or I need to learn more about Islamic laws?
So, excessive doubting from a psychological point of view does come under anxiety and a mental health condition, which I'll talk about in a bit. But from an Islamic standpoint, I have dealt with a few people in my counseling practice who had very similar concerns, and hence that tells you that you're not alone. A lot of us do go through that, but what you have to first check is whether it is just a matter of confusion from the religion point of view that you need to seek a scholar advice for, or is it a mental health issue in general. If it is a mental health issue in general, then excessive doubting won't just be limited to your namaz or wuzu, but it will also be seen in your day-to-day life, where you're constantly checking on things in the house, or you're overthinking about a lot of things, and it is consuming you so much so that the main point that you have to look out for is that it affects your day-to-day functioning, which means that if these things did not exist, you would be able to carry out your chores in a much more comfortable and peaceful manner. If it's taking up that kind of space, then you must seek a professional mental health advice as to what your diagnosis is. Just generally to give you an overview of the diagnosis, a lot of people come under the diagnosis of OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, where you constantly keep thinking of a thought, where you're worrying about something that is going wrong. That is an obsession, and the compulsive part of it forces you to make an action, and until you don't do it in a particular way, then that obsession will keep going on and bother you throughout the day. So for example, let's say I was in the kitchen working, and then I was done with cooking, I went out, and I still keep on worrying if I really turned off the stove or is it still on, until and unless I go and check it, not just once but sometimes 5 times, 10 times, until I know for sure that I've checked it and I'm peaceful with it. So if you're somebody who experiences these kind of worries apart from your namaz and wuzu also, then it is a mental health concern, but do not diagnose it yourself. Go to a professional to do so. And also take in some Islamic scholars' perspective. As far as I have learnt through my practice, is that you are allowed to ignore these worries and go on without repeating it. If it is a genuine confusion once in a while, then you need to repeat your prayers as per the Islamic laws that you are following. But if it's coming under these categories, then Islam is a generous and understanding religion, and the intention counts.
Right. How can one deal with anxiety related to severe phobias?
Again, this is something that you need to take professional treatment for. This is a very specific treatment plan that we follow when we have patients who come for phobias. And remember that phobias are different from your general fears. You might be fearful of the dark or height, but when it's a phobia, it will be so severe that even imagining you in that kind of a situation will trigger you. So if it's that much, then you go and check with a counselor. I'll just give you an idea of what we do if somebody like that comes to us. We follow this plan called the systematic desensitization plan, where we gradually expose you to face that fear by teaching you relaxation techniques like breathing, your body relaxation, meditation, etc. Once you learn that, we have a step by step plan. For example, let's say I am scared of spider. I will first be exposed to only imagining a spider over and over again until I can use those relaxation techniques successfully, followed by, say, looking at a picture of a spider, then looking at a plastic spider from far, then actually touching that plastic spider, and then imagining a real spider, and then actually seeing the real spider. So this is not something that we do in a period of day, but it takes weeks and sometimes months to reach there. So don't try to do it by yourself, because it can be really triggering.
Right. Is there any reason for bad memory?
There are a number of reasons, but firstly I'll talk about the basic memory reasons which we see is that lack of proper sleep, nutrition issues, your physical exercise is less, your lifestyle is unhealthy. Also aging, of course, as we all know, is a big problem. For all the other reasons that I mentioned, you just need to improve your lifestyle and have a healthy diet, have good sleep, etc. But if it's the aging that we are talking about, you might wonder what can one do. Keep your mind active, do things like solving puzzles, reading things, memorize small surahs, ayats from Quran to improve your memory. These are the basic things, but for more severe things, there are specifically issues like medical issues, your head injuries, your mental health issues. Even when you are stressed, you are anxious, worried, or if you're somebody who overthinks, then you're taking up so much of your mental space that you tend to forget. It's not really a pure memory issue, but it's a mental health issue that's leading to forgetting things.
Right. As you mentioned about dua and reciting Quran, there is a dua I remember. It is in the Quran itself, from chapter number 2, verse 32, which says, "Glory be to you. We have no knowledge except what you have taught us. You are truly the all-knowing, all-wise," and this can help increase your memory.
Indeed.
Another question that we have received is how to overcome the feeling of regret.
Right. Firstly, I do not think we need to overcome the feeling of regret very quickly. You need to spend some time pondering over the regret that you're feeling, accept the fact that it's okay to feel regret. In psychology, we have this concept of healthy and unhealthy emotions. So, healthy regret and an unhealthy regret would differ. A healthy regret would be something where you feel a little disappointed for something happening and yet accept the fact that it happened, look for answers as to why or what might have gone wrong and what you can do better. Regret is a very healthy feeling if taken the right way, because it allows you to grow. If there is no regret, there is very less growth. So it's okay to feel regret. It's only when you feel extremely guilty and beat yourself up for it and keep criticizing yourself or your fate and your destiny which is a problem. Ask yourself one thing: what is in my control and what is not in my control. And whatever is in your control in that moment, do it. If something is not in your control, then leave it. For example, if your regret is related to a relationship, your friend, your family member, then just go and speak to them and clear it out. Even though it's a very difficult thing to do sometimes, just do it because it's in your control. But if it's something that you cannot control, it's a damage that's done, probably an accident, maybe I bashed my car somewhere, then it's done. You can't really go back and erase that thing. So that's okay because there's nothing you can do about it in that moment, but go back into that place and know that next time these are the things I can do differently. Apart from that, there might be sometimes issues and concerns from a long past, and you're not able to heal through that. For those incidences, you may try to write them down and go through that. The moment you try to suppress an emotion, it comes to you in a much harder fashion. So instead of suppressing it, write it down, talk to people, talk to yourself about it regularly in order to let it go. But feeling frustrated about something is totally fine. You don't need to always feel happy about things. It's okay to experience regret. It's not that bad of an emotion.
Right, but what if it is so extreme that you are actually so frustrated that you cannot focus anywhere else?
Right. That's the thing I'm talking about, which comes as an unhealthy regret. It's like extreme guilt, for which sometimes you may want to dig deeper. Maybe it's not just related to that incident right at place, but it's coming from an issue that you might have experienced in your childhood, something that's triggered. This could be a trigger. This is not just related to that incident anymore, but you're experiencing something from the past, you know. So let's say you messed up something, and this thing, and somebody told you something for that, probably made a comment on it, and you cannot get over that comment, and it's playing in your head again and again for days and weeks. Maybe it's not the comment from that person that's really the frustrating point, but it is a similar comment to something that you've heard over and over again as a child, and that could be triggering in that moment, because the experiences we have as children, in that moment we are not capable to process those emotions because we're too young. So as an adult, we store all of that in a box. It's important to open that box and look for answers. Ask yourself, be curious about what your childhood was like. When you're stuck with something, just go into your childhood. That's the simple answer.
Like, can you explain a little bit more? Like, what do we do? We imagine ourselves as a child, and
Right. So, when you look into your childhood, you may have a few experiences where you were criticized or you were told to do something a certain way, and that shaped your personality as an adult in a particular way. So, when you mess up, probably as a child, let's say I was not allowed to make mistakes because, as I told you, the elder child is not usually is supposed to be responsible and perfect. Let's say I was one of them and I was told to do things perfectly, and now if I mess up and if somebody tells me that, oh, how could you make a mistake like this, I didn't expect this from you, you're not looking at that person, that friend, you're looking at your parents saying it, and it's a very unconscious experience. So the first thing that you have to do is be aware. Most of the times we get triggered because we're not aware we are triggered, and that is why it's going on and on. But when we pause and we look into our childhood, it makes us more aware, and we know that that's what is something I'm experiencing.
Right.
It is maybe that 7-year or 10-year-old girl who didn't know how to process her emotions and felt very helpless in that situation. That girl is probably alive in me right now. We all have a child inside of us that we call inner child in the therapy setting, and when you really look into that inner child of yours, you will know that that child needed some more reassurance, some more acceptance that was not given in that moment. So now you are an adult, you have to parent that inner child. Talk to yourself. Self talk and acceptance and a lot of reassurance can help you heal better. This will be a process of parenting yourself which can take a lot of time, I would advise you to take guidance from a mental health professional so that they can guide you through this process. It is such a beautiful journey if you go through that in a professional manner.
Right. Lastly, what are some Islamic practices that can help reduce stress and anxiety?
Right. So Islam has given us beautiful ways to deal with stress, anxiety, depression, and all the negative emotions. Just to give you an example of how we deal with this in a counseling practice, which is that if somebody is experiencing depression, apart from the therapy that we do, we encourage them to socialize and build a good support system, which Islam has already told us through Sile Rahim. Meet your relatives or invite them over. Islam encourages it so much, and counseling also does the same thing. So, Sile Rahim is something that helps you with depression and also stress. You're going through some stress, you just talk it out when you are meeting somebody, and you just start feeling a little lighter. There is also this concept of spiritual psychology in counseling, where there are a few things we encourage people to do, like giving back to the community and helping other people. And we all know the importance that Islam has placed on giving sadaqah, helping people, volunteering around the community. So this is so similar to what our counseling practice suggests already. So if we are just following these things that Islam has told us to do, I don't think we will have to look for these basic counseling advices. There's also another point in spiritual psychology which talks about meditation through your religious practices. And what better meditation than our namaz and duas that we have?
Absolutely.
It's the most peaceful thing that anybody can ever experience, and no other activity which is a worldly activity is so peaceful than namaz.
Right. So thank you so much. I already feel like I have new energy towards life, and it was really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. It was wonderful discussing these psychological issues with an Islamic standpoint.